Good morning. Today we will look at Genesis 23 and 24. And we've been reading and learning about Abraham and Sarah. And today, Sarah says Sarah lived 127 years, and this was the length of her life. She died, and Abraham was looking for a place then to bury his wife. And so she died, it says, at Kiriath-arba, or Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham, of course, went into mourning and wept for her, which is, totally understandable. When someone we love dies, we hurt and we cry. And I just read a deal this morning that reminded me that, sometimes when we are in that period of mourning and we just don't know which way to turn. Our minds can hardly even function to think about, and people well-meaning will ask, what can I do? And they'll say, if you need something, let me know. And, but it's one of the reasons that, in our communities that, this neighbor will bring a pan of bars, or this one will bring a hot dish or some buns or whatever. We understand that in this time of mourning, you just don't really think and you don't really function quite as you should. And so Abraham took a time of mourning. And it's just a reminder for us that it's something that we need to do. You don't just get over it. It's continually, forever, a part of you. Anyway, he mourns and he weeps for her. And then it says he rose up and he went to the leaders of this community, the Hittites, where he was living, and he asks for a certain cave, if he can purchase this certain cave as a burial place. And, it's kind of common that way that they would do that. But they didn't want him to have to purchase it. They wanted to give it to him. And, and he said, well, it's worth, 400, I think it was 400 pieces of whatever, worth 400 shekels of silver. And they didn't really want to sell it to him. They said, just let us give it to you. And he, being the man that he was, with the integrity that he had, said, I would rather purchase it so that it's illegal and binding and everything. So that's what they do. Abraham purchases this land that includes this cave, and Sarah is buried there. And it gives us a description of that land, the east of Mamre, in this field. And when Abraham dies later, he too is buried in that same cave, because it's the land that they purchased. And it's in this land of Canaan, which, many years later, this, Moses in the promised land, and Canaan comes into the pictures again. So we have Sarah has passed away, and she's been buried. And as chapter 24 begins, it tells us that Abraham was old. Well, of course he was old. Sarah was 127. Abraham was 10, 11 years older than that. So he's, well aged in so many ways. And he doesn't want his son Isaac, this promised heir, this one who is the promised father of this multitude of descendants he'll have. He wants Isaac to have a wife of his own people, not one of the Hittites, but, of the Israelites, of the Jews. So he sends 10 of his servants, or he sends a servant that takes 10 camels and a bunch of gifts and everything to go back. And Abraham tells him, go back and figure this out. And if they're not willing to come, so be it. And so when the servant gets close to the city by the well of water, to the home country anyway, and but there was quite a conversation between Abraham and the servant. Just go back to verse 5. well, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me. Well, must I take your son then back to the land where you came? And he says, no, don't take my son back there. This is our lands now. So the Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring, I'll give this land. So Abraham says, this is the promised land, and this is where we will be. And he says, you will take a wife and a son. He says, if the woman is not willing, then you will be free from this oath. Only you must not take my son back there. So Abraham was adamant about that he didn't want his son to go back, Isaac to go back. So anyway, the servant goes back, and he's camped. He stops there by the well outside the city. It's late in the day, toward the evening, and the women come to draw water. And the servant prays to God. And this is, a beautiful prayer. O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. I'm standing here by the spring of water, and the daughters are coming. Let the girl, a very, I think, an honest prayer. He's, how am I going to do this? It's just, this is a insurmountable task almost, to go and to find a woman who's willing to leave her home and come to meet this man she's never probably heard of before, or maybe she's heard of him, but doesn't know, and to come and travel to become this man's wife. It's quite a challenge for this servant to find this particular woman anyway. And so the prayer, it's let the girl to whom I say, please offer your jar that I may have a drink, So this girl that I ask for a drink, let her response be to give me a drink and also offer to water my camels, draw the water for all of my camels to drink. And he says, by this I will know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. And before he finished speaking, verse 15, here was Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, and Abraham's brother. So again, this somewhat a relationship, and this is perfectly legitimate then. She comes to the spring, and she fills her water jar, and yep, sure enough, the servant asks for a drink. She gives him a drink, and she says, I will draw water for your camels. So she filled all of them, and verse 21, the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. And when she was finished with that, the man takes his gold nose ring weighing a half a shekel, 2 bracelets for her arms, and he says, tell me whose daughter you are. And they'll have this conversation, and he tells her of his mission, of why he's there. And then it says, verse 28, the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. And Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and that's another familiar name, Laban. Ran out to the man to the spring, and it's because as soon as he'd seen the nose ring and the bracelets, and when he heard the words of his sister, he said, come in, you blessed of the Lord, and so he Laban invited this servant in. And, so the servant says, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed our, and the story goes on, and it's, detailed in so many ways. And the father of the girl, says, can she remain here for a few more days? And the servant, well, I'd really like her to go with me. And they ask her, will you go with this man? Verse 58, will you go with this man? And she says, I will. And so then Rebekah went then with this servant. And the chapter 24 ends with, verse 67. Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. I like that line. I love that line. He took her to be his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted, it says, after his mother's death, by the love of another woman. But, Isaac and Rebekah, their story is another good story that we'll be reading, in the upcoming days. But, it's just so this woman comes, not knowing him at all, and and it says, and he loved her, and it kind of made me think of Tevier in the movie Fiddler on the Roof when he asks his wife, "Do you love me?" And they think about it and they talk about it and they come to the realization that yes, after all these years, 25 years of marriage, yes, they do love each other, and maybe it's not such a big thing, but it is a big thing to know that you are loved and appreciated by your spouse, and to share that love, and it's just, the love we have for each other is not very much really compared to the love that God shows for us each and every day, but when we can love and when we can have that other person being very important in our lives, and that other person, looking at us and, wanting to do good. And that's, I think loving someone is wanting the very best for that person and trying your very best to, give that person, as much as you can, and to live together in mutual love is a true blessing.